Hello, amazing viewers. I'm Morgan, your storyteller, and a huge welcome to you. I hope you're doing wonderfully today. Before we dive into this incredible journey together, let me set the stage. She fought to resist, but the chains of her gilded cage felt heavier than any man's touch. A reluctant heiress bound by duty, her world was ice and control, until a marriage of convenience forced her to confront the quiet storm in a stranger's eyes, a man whose earth-scented presence promised to shatter her carefully constructed walls. This isn't just a story of duty, but of a forbidden attraction so potent it threatens to rewrite destiny itself. If you crave soul-stirring romance, the transformative power of unexpected love, and a connection that defies every boundary, you are exactly where you need to be. This is a love story that lingers, so be sure to watch until the very end. You won't regret it. Ready for an unforgettable journey? Buckle up, hit subscribe, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The morning air at Whispering Pines held the deceptive crispness of a gilded coin, bright, valuable, but cold. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Amina Dubois' office, illuminating dust motes dancing above the polished mahogany desk. Outside, the Dubois legacy stretched in emerald waves. Acres of soybeans ripening towards harvest, orchards heavy with late summer peaches, fields of lavender buzzing with industry. Yet, inside the glass-walled sanctum, the air hummed with a different kind of tension, thick and sour as overripe fruit. Amina sat ramrod straight, her obsidian skin flawless against the stark white silk of her blouse. Her fingers, tipped with immaculate clear polish, hovered over the keyboard, but her gaze was fixed not on the spreadsheet glowing before her, but on the bleak red figures marching down the screen like an invading army. Projected shortfall, Q4, liquidity crisis, imminent, loan covenant breach, likely. Each line was a hammer blow to the foundations her great-grandfather had laid, foundations she'd sworn to uphold. The scent of lemon polish and aged paper, usually comforting, now felt cloying. A faint tremor threatened her composure, ruthlessly suppressed. She was Amina Dubois, the last pillar holding up a crumbling empire. Vulnerability was a luxury buried deep, encased in layers of meticulous control and tailored armor. The shrill ring of the antique desk phone shattered the silence. She answered, her voice cool, modulated, betraying nothing. Dubois, Amina. Her father's voice, once robust, now frayed and thin as worn silk, crackled down the line. The miles between Whispering Pines and the Swiss clinic felt tangible in that strained syllable. The board, the silent partners, they've reviewed the projections. A pause, heavy with unspoken defeat. There's an offer, a condition. Amina's knuckles whitened on the receiver. Go on. Consolidation. Protection. But, he coughed, a weak, rattling sound. It requires stability. Visible commitment. To the land. To the future. Another pause. Longer this time. They insist you marry. A cold wave washed over her. Marry. Father. Be specific. Who? Silas Thorne. All name landed like a stone in still water. Thorne. The taciturn laborer who worked the farthest west field. The man who appeared with the dawn and vanished with the dusk, speaking only when absolutely necessary. His presence as unobtrusive and yet as pervasive as the scent of turned earth. He was an enigma wrapped in worn flannel and calluses, a necessary cog in the vast, struggling machine of Whispering Pines, but barely more than a shadow in her meticulously ordered world. Thorne. Disbelief sharpened her tone, cutting through the practiced calm. The farmhand. This is the stability they envision. A hired hand. It's non-negotiable, Amina. Her father's voice held a finality that brooked no argument, underscored by desperation. A condition of the debt restructuring. The silent partners. They trust him, implicitly. Marry him, secure the farm's future. Or, the unspoken alternative hung heavy, foreclosure, dispersal, the end of Dubois Farms. The papers are drawn. He's agreed. It's a formality, a business arrangement. A business arrangement. Marrying a man whose face she could barely recall beyond a false impression of sun-bleached hair and a stoic demeanor, whose hands were stained with soil while hers navigated spreadsheets. The sheer absurdity choked her. Yet beneath the icy shock, the pragmatist stirred. The land, the legacy, her blood was in this soil. Was pride worth its extinction? Understood, she managed, the word tasting like ash. When? Soon, next week. Keep it simple. The line went dead. Amina slowly replaced the receiver. She rose, walking to the window. Below, the farm pulsed with life she was fighting to save. Her reflection in the glass superimposed itself over the view. a beautiful, formidable fortress, eyes like polished onyx reflecting not warmth, but a chilling calculation. Desire is a luxury, control is survival, he is a tool, a necessity. This land is blood. The Westfield was a world away from the manicured lawns near the manor. Here the earth was rougher, the air thick with the sweet rot scent of decaying vegetation and the mineral tang of freshly turned soil. Amina stood at the edge, partially concealed by the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak, observing, directive in hand, a flimsy pretext to see the man she was to bind her life to. Silas Thorne worked with a rhythmic, unhurried efficiency that was almost hypnotic. He drove a harrow, the heavy tines biting into the dark earth, churning it into neat damp rows. Sunlight caught the sweat-darkened fabric of his shirt stretched across shoulders that spoke of sustained labor, not gym sculpting. Dust coated his worn boots, and the faded denim clinging to powerful thighs. He rarely looked up, his focus absolute, a man seemingly carved from the very land he worked. Yet there was an unnerving stillness about him, even in motion. Birds didn't scatter as he passed. A rabbit froze momentarily near the tree line, then hopped calmly away as if he were part of the scenery. It wasn't just quiet, it was a profound absorption, an intensity that belied the simplicity of the task. As if sensing her scrutiny, he stopped the tractor. The sudden silence was jarring. He dismounted with a fluid grace unexpected in a laborer, wiped his brow with a forearm, and finally turned. His gaze found hers across the 50 yards separating them. Amina felt it like a physical touch. Those eyes, storm-gray flint, holding depths that contradicted everything about his station. They weren't dull or resigned. They were watchful, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. A flicker of something. Not insolence, not deference, but pure, unsettling awareness passed between them. The directive crumpled slightly in her fist. He didn't approach, didn't wave. He simply held her gaze for 3 long, breathless heartbeats. The air crackled, thick with the drone of insects and the unspoken tension of their impending, absurd union. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back, remounted the tractor, and the engine roared back to life, shattering the fragile moment. Amina retreated, the scent of diesel and damp earth clinging to her, the image of those storm-gray eyes seared into her mind. His silence is a mirror, reflecting what? My own captivity. The wedding was a mockery of union, performed in the manor's cavernous library. Tall windows offered views of the vibrant land they were ostensibly uniting to protect, but inside, the atmosphere was frigid. Books, leather-bound witnesses to centuries of Dubois history, lined the walls. The scent of old paper and lemon polish was overpowering. Amina stood before the stone-faced justice of the peace, a pillar of controlled elegance in a severe ivory suit, her hair swept into a flawless, intricate knot. Every line of her body screamed resistance held in check, only by monumental willpower. Silas stood beside her, clean but undeniably out of place in simple, sturdy work clothes, dark trousers, a plain white button-down that seemed to strain across his chest. He radiated quiet intensity, a contained force next to her glacial poise. The ceremony was stripped bare, a clinical recitation of vows. Amina's I do was clipped, precise, falling like ice chips onto the marble floor. Silas's response was a low rumble, barely audible. I do. No rings were exchanged beyond the plain gold band the JP produced, a cold circle that felt alien on Amina's finger. No touch beyond the brush of his calloused fingertips as he slid the band onto hers. The brief contact sent an unwelcome jolt up her arm. As the JP pronounced them wed, a beat of stifling silence followed. Amina kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the man now legally bound to her. She felt the weight of his presence beside her, a solid, unsettling heat radiating through the chill air. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," the JP said, the name sounding bizarre, wrong. Silas made a non-committal sound in his throat. Amina flinched almost imperceptibly. As the JP gathered his papers, Silas finally turned his head slightly towards her. His voice, rough with disuse but surprisingly deep, cut through the silence, low enough only for her to hear. "Dubois suits you better." His storm-gray eyes held hers for a fraction of a second, not mocking, not warm, but intensely observant. The land wouldn't recognize you as anything else. It wasn't banter, it was a statement, stark and unexpectedly perceptive, acknowledging the absurdity, while subtly reinforcing her identity tied irrevocably to Whispering Pines. It felt less like flirtation, and more like a territorial claim on her essence. Amina's breath hitched. She offered no reply, merely inclined her head a fraction, a queen dismissing a subject, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. He saw it. A flicker in those gray depths might have been satisfaction, or just the light. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the suddenly cavernous library, the scent of him, sun, earth, and something indefinably male, lingering faintly in the air. He'd observed too much. Parallel lines. That was the new geometry of whispering pines. Amina occupied the manor, a gleaming nerve center of financial worry and decaying grandeur. Silas Thorne inhabited the small weathered cabin near the old stables, a relic from the farm's more populous past. Amina maintained a glacial distance. Communication was conducted via crisp, impersonal notes left on the kitchen counter beside the industrial coffee pot. Harvest team meeting. East Barn, 7 a.m. AD. Perimeter fence near creek, needs repair. AD. But the tasks were always completed, often before she even voiced the need. The sagging fence near the creek was mended with sturdy, precise workmanship by the next morning. The temperamental tractor in the south field, which had defied her own mechanics, purred back to life. Days bled into a week. The oppressive silence between them became a living thing, thick with resentment on her side, and, what on his, watchfulness, indifference. It was maddening. She avoided the west field. She timed her arrivals and departures to minimize contact. Yet, his presence was inescapable. The scent of turned earth when she walked near the barns reminded her of his hands. The solid thunk of an axe splitting wood carried from the direction of his cabin, echoing the tension coiled within her. One dawn, stepping onto the manor's wide front porch to retrieve the Financial Times, she stopped short. On the weathered wicker table, beside the rolled newspaper, stood a simple mason jar. Inside, a riot of delicate white wildflowers, Queen Anne's lace, their intricate lacework petals seeming impossibly fragile against the sturdy glass. Tough, resilient, thriving on the edges, unexpected beauty in the untamed margins. There was no note. No one else would have done this. Amina stared at it. Was it a peace offering? A mockery? A simple observation of something he thought was pretty? Her hand reached out, fingers brushing the cool glass. For a treacherous second, the rigid control faltered. A memory surfaced. Her mother, years ago, tucking a similar wildflower behind her ear, laughing. Then the walls slammed back down. Weakness, dangerous sentimentality. He is a tool, a necessity. With a swift, almost violent motion, she picked up the jar and threw the flowers over the porch railing, into the damp grass below. They lay there, white against green, looking suddenly forlorn. Her hand trembled slightly as she snatched up the newspaper and retreated inside, the slam of the heavy door echoing in the quiet morning. Insolence, or a reflection of something I've buried. The storm rolled in with the subtlety of a siege engine. One moment, the sky was bruised purple and green, the air thick and electric, tasting of ozone. The next, the heavens opened with a roar. Rain lashed the manor windows, driven sideways by a howling wind. Lightning fractured the premature twilight, followed by thunder that shook the foundations. Amina had been checking the foaling stalls in the east barn. Caught in the open yard as the deluge hit, she fought her way towards the relative shelter of the stables, the wind snatching her breath, rain plastering her silk blouse to her skin, chilling her to the bone. As she neared the stable doors, a frantic whinny cut through the storm's din. Apollo, the high-strung young stallion, had broken his tether in his paddock and was careening in panicked circles, eyes rolling white, hooves slipping on the slickening mud. "Apollo, steady!" Amina's voice was swallowed by the wind. She grabbed a lead rope hanging just inside the stable door and plunged back into the maelstrom. The rain stung her face, blinding her. Apollo reared, a dark, powerful silhouette against the lightning-flashed sky, his scream raw with terror. Amina lunged for his bridle, but he shied violently, wrenching the rope from her grasp and sending her stumbling backwards into the sucking mud. Despair washed over her, cold as the rain. She couldn't control this. The storm, the horse, the farm, her life, all spiraling into chaos. Then, a solid shape materialized through the gray curtain of rain. Silas. He moved with startling calm through the chaos, ignoring the lashing rain, his focus entirely on the terrified animal. He didn't shout. He approached at an angle, murmuring low, rhythmic sounds lost to the wind, but somehow reaching the stallion. Apollo snorted, eyes wide, muscles quivering, but he stopped his frantic circling, head swinging towards Silas. Slowly, steadily, Silas closed the distance. He didn't grab, he offered a steady hand. Apollo flinched but didn't bolt. Silas's fingers closed gently but firmly on the bridle, his other hand moving in slow, soothing strokes down the stallion's wet, trembling neck. His voice, a deep, resonant murmur, finally reached Amina's ears, a counterpoint to the storm's fury. "Easy, easy now. Storm's passing. Just noise and water. Easy." The transformation was astonishing. The panic visibly leached out of Apollo, replaced by shivering exhaustion. Silas gathered the loose lead rope with one hand, his grip on the bridle sure and calming. Only then did he turn towards Amina, still crouched in the mud.
Rain streamed down his face, plastering his sun-bleached hair dark against his skull. His shirt was soaked through, clinging to the powerful planes of his chest and shoulders. His storm-gray eyes met hers, not with reproach, but with an unnerving, focused intensity. "You all right?" His voice was rough, barely audible over the rain. Amina pushed herself up, mud slick on her hands, humiliation warring with a treacherous spike of relief. "Fine," she managed, her voice tight. He nodded curtly. "Get inside. I'll settle him." He began leading the now placid Apollo towards the stable, his movements deliberate and reassuring. As Amina stumbled towards the stable door, Silas paused beside her. Without a word, his free hand came up and settled firmly, possessively, on the small of her rain-slicked back. The heat of his palm seared through the soaked silk, a brand against her chilled skin. It was a gesture of pure practicality, guiding her, steadying her on the slippery ground, yet it felt shockingly intimate. His touch radiated a solid, undeniable strength, a heat that momentarily stole her breath. It lasted only seconds, just long enough to propel her towards the doorway. Then his hand was gone, leaving an imprint of warmth that lingered long after he vanished into the stable with the horse. Amina stood just inside the door, dripping onto the stone floor, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The drumming rain on the roof filled the sudden silence. She could still feel the ghost of his hand, the shocking warmth, the sheer power contained in that brief contact. The scent of wet horse, rain-lashed earth, and something uniquely him, sun-baked skin and hard work, filled her nostrils. Control, her constant companion, felt slippery, fractured. The fortress walls, meticulously maintained, showed the first, treacherous crack, not from the storm outside, but from the unsettling heat of a farmhand's hand. He sees too much, he touches, and it burns. This is erosion, this is danger.
Chapter 2. The storm left whispering pines washed clean and strangely vibrant, but within the manor's walls, a different kind of dampness lingered. Amina couldn't shake the phantom heat of Silas's hand on her back. It had been practical, necessary even, guiding her out of the mud and the stallion's path. Yet the imprint remained, a brand seared into her memory, alongside the image of him standing calm in the maelstrom, his low voice taming the storm within Apollo. Control is fracturing, she thought. Now, days later, the fracture felt like a widening fissure, threatening the foundations of her carefully constructed world. She avoided the stables, avoided the west field, avoided as much as possible the scent of wet earth that now carried an unsettling association. Instead, she buried herself deeper in the cold numbers, the spreadsheets of familiar, if hostile, territory. The silence between her and Silas wasn't just absence, it was a charged void, thick with unspoken questions and the hum of her own treacherous pulse whenever she caught a glimpse of him across a yard or heard the distant thud of his axe. Late one evening, long after the farm's diurnal rhythm had settled into the chirping symphony of crickets, Amina found herself drawn not to her pristine office, but to the manor's library. The cavernous room was usually a monument to her family's past, smelling of leather bindings and dust. Tonight, a single lamp cast a small island of warm light near the large bay window overlooking the moon-drenched fields. He was there. Silas stood silhouetted against the night, not reading, not doing anything discernible. He was simply present, a dark, still shape gazing out at the silvered expanse of soybeans, the distant woods like cut velvet against the indigo sky. The quiet intensity he carried wasn't diminished by stillness, it was amplified. He seemed part of the landscape, an ancient oak rooted deep, holding secrets in his gnarled silence. Amina paused in the doorway, the worn Persian rug soft beneath her bare feet. She should retreat. This was his space now, in these stolen nocturnal moments. Yet a perverse curiosity, or perhaps the magnetic pull of that unsettling stillness, held her fast. She moved silently towards her own habitual chair on the opposite side of the lamp's glow, the leather sighing softly as she sat. She picked up a neglected volume on sustainable irrigation, its pages cool beneath her fingertips, but her attention was fractured, pulled relentlessly towards the window. Minutes stretched, measured only by the slow crawl of moonlight across the floorboards. The silence wasn't empty, it was dense, woven with the rustle of turning pages she wasn't truly reading, and the low thrum of her own heartbeat. She noticed things. The way he held himself, not slumped like a weary laborer, but with a poised alertness, a contained readiness. The precise, almost surgical neatness of his tool shed, glimpsed earlier that day, no rusted chaos, but implements hanging in orderly rows, edges honed sharp, and the scar, a thick, pale line snaking across the knuckles of his right hand, stark white against the weathered tan. It spoke of violence, of impact, of something brutal and final. It didn't belong on the hand of a man who coaxed life from soil.
You stare, Mrs. Thorne. His voice, low and roughened by disuse, cut through the silence like a stone dropped into a still pond. He hadn't turned. He still gazed out at the moonlit fields, but the awareness was absolute. Does the view displease you? Amina's breath hitched. The title, Mrs. Thorne, still felt like a poorly fitted glove. She forced her voice level. Cool. The view is adequate, Mr. Thorne. The company, however, is somewhat taciturn for a library. A flicker of the old Amina, sharp and deflecting. A faint sound, almost a rumble deep in his chest. Was it amusement? Books don't require conversation, just observation. He finally turned his head, just enough for the lamplight to catch the sharp angle of his jaw, the shadowed hollow of his cheek. His storm-gray eyes met hers across the pool of light. Unlike some occupants, the air crackled. Flirtation. It was so dry, so understated, wrapped in observation, it was hard to tell. Was he calling her out for staring, or acknowledging the tension that hummed between them? Amina refused to blush. She lifted her chin slightly. Occupants usually announce their presence, or at least their intentions. He said slowly, his voice a gravelly caress in the quiet room, a better observed than declared, less disruptive. He turned fully back to the window, dismissing her, yet his words hung in the air heavy with implication. Observed. He'd been observing her. For how long, and what exactly had he seen? The encounter left Amina unsettled, the library's usual solace replaced by a prickling awareness. She doubled down on distance, issuing directives with glacial efficiency, timing her movements to avoid him, yet his presence seemed to seep into the very fabric of Whispering Pines. Repairing a leaking faucet in the guest wing, a task she hadn't assigned, she found the wrench he'd used, its handle worn smooth by a grip far stronger than any mechanics she knew. Walking the perimeter fence near the old orchard, she discovered a section meticulously reinforced with fresh, sturdy posts, her unspoken worry about deer incursions silently addressed. It was infuriating, efficient, yes, but it felt like an invasion, a silent commentary on her oversight. The scent of lavender, usually a calming balm, became another trigger. It bloomed profusely near the path to his cabin, passing it one late afternoon, the air thick with its heady perfume. She saw him. He was hauling sacks of feed from the delivery truck parked near the barn, muscles bunching under the thin cotton of his sweat-darkened shirt. The setting sun gilded the sweat on his neck, the powerful line of his shoulders, the lean taper of his waist. He moved with that same unnerving economy, each motion purposeful, strong. Amina forced her gaze away, focusing on the undulating purple sea of lavender, but the image burned behind her eyelids. This is madness. He is, that is all. Her resolve hardened. She needed leverage, something to reassert the distance, the control. The quarterly ledgers needed his signature, a mere formality, but one she could weaponize with her presence. She wouldn't leave them on the counter like a servant. She would deliver them to his cabin, at dusk, a reminder of boundaries, of her position. The walk to the cabin felt unnaturally long. The lavender scent was overpowering here, mingling with the damp earth smell of the approaching evening. Fireflies winked in the gathering gloom. The cabin itself was small, weathered wood bleached silver by time, nestled under ancient oaks. A single window glowed warmly. The door stood slightly ajar. Amina paused, hand raised to knock, the heavy leather-bound ledger cold against her chest. Through the gap, she saw a sliver of the interior, not what she expected, not rough-hewn benches and muddy boots. It was sparse, yes, but meticulously ordered. A simple, well-made bed, a sturdy table, and on a sleek modern desk that looked utterly alien in the rustic setting, a bank of monitors glowed softly, displaying complex graphs and shifting data streams. A single breathtaking photograph dominated one wall, the northern lights, a riot of emerald and violet swirling across a frozen star-strewn sky, wild, untamed beauty captured in perfect stillness. The hum wasn't just crickets, it was the low thrum of sophisticated electronics. Before she could process the dissonance, the farmhand's hovel housing this sleek, technological heart, the door to the small washroom attached to the cabin opened. Silas emerged. He was shirtless. A towel was slung low around his hips. Water droplets glistened on the hard planes of his chest, tracing the defined ridges of his abdomen, catching in the faint dusting of hair that arrowed down past the towel's edge. His skin was tanned gold, marked here and there by old faint scars, one a long thin line along a rib, another knotted and pale near his shoulder. Muscle corded his arms and shoulders, not the bulky strength of a weightlifter, but the lean, powerful build of a predator or a warrior, honed by relentless activity. He was drying his hair with another towel, his face obscured, his body a sculpted testament to raw, unadorned masculinity. He lowered the towel, his storm-gray eyes locked onto hers through the open doorway. Time stopped. The heavy ledger felt like a lead weight in Amina's suddenly nerveless hands. The humid evening air turned thick, suffocating. Every detail imprinted itself with hyper-clarity, the sheen of water on his skin, the pulse beating at the base of his throat, the way a droplet traced a path down the center of his chest, over the hard plane of his stomach, disappearing into the towel. The intelligence in his gaze was unmistakable now, sharp and assessing, completely at odds with the laborer's disguise. He didn't startle, didn't grab for a shirt. He simply stood there, utterly still, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. He was completely exposed, yet radiated an unnerving sense of power, of being completely in control of the moment, of her reaction. Heat flooded Amina's face, scorching her neck, her chest. It was a visceral wave, a mix of shock, acute awareness, and a forbidden pull so strong it felt like a physical force. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. The fortress walls didn't just crack, they crumbled. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stare, transfixed by the shocking intimacy of the scene, by the sheer overwhelming presence of him. A slow, knowing curve touched his lips, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of her presence, of her reaction, of the sudden undeniable current arcing between them in the charged silence. He nodded towards the book clutched against her chest, his eyes never leaving hers. The sound broke the spell, but only just. Amina's grip tightened on the ledger, words tangled in her throat. She managed a jerky nod, her gaze flickering desperately away from his bare torso, landing on the mesmerizing swirl of the Northern Lights photograph, then snapping back to his face, unable to escape the magnetic pull. "Leave them on the table," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm, as if standing half-naked before his employer was an everyday occurrence. He began to rub the towel over his hair again, a casual movement that flexed the muscles in his arm and shoulder, drawing her unwilling gaze back to the water-slicked skin. Panic, sharp and primal, surged through Amina, not just embarrassment, but the terrifying sense of being utterly seen. Her carefully guarded reaction laid bare. She couldn't stay, couldn't breathe. With a strangled sound that was neither word nor sigh, she thrust the ledger onto the small table just inside the door, turned on her heel, and fled. She stumbled back through the lavender path, the heady scent now cloying, nauseating. The image burned behind her eyes, the sleek tech, the wild photograph, the water on his skin, the knowing look in those storm-gray eyes. Who is he? The question screamed in her mind, louder than the frantic beating of her heart. The farmhand facade was a lie, a profound, dangerous lie, and the forbidden attraction she'd been battling wasn't just inconvenient, it felt like walking blindfolded towards a precipice. The days that followed were a torment. Amina existed in a state of heightened, feverish awareness. Every sound, every scent, every shadow seemed amplified, charged with the memory of that moment. She avoided the cabin path like it was plague-ridden. She buried herself in work, but the numbers blurred, the words on contracts swam before her eyes. Silas, frustratingly, seemed unchanged. He worked the fields, repaired machinery, moved through the farm with his usual quiet efficiency, but Amina now saw the cracks in the performance. The unnatural stillness wasn't rustic simplicity, it was control. The precision in his movements wasn't just skill, it was discipline. The intelligence in his eyes wasn't latent, it was acute, watchful, knowing. She tried to rebuild the walls. Ice was her armor. She snapped an order about the irrigation timers being off schedule, her voice brittle as glass. "See that it's corrected immediately, Mr. Thorne. Precision is crucial, or the yield suffers." It was petty, a jab at the precision she now saw in him. He was oiling a harness near the tack room door. He didn't look up immediately, his hands moving with that same deliberate care. Then he lifted his head, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just that unnerving calm. "Precision," he echoed, his voice low. He held up the oil can, examining the nozzle. "Like this, measured, calculated." He squeezed, a single, perfect drop falling onto the leather. Or, he gestured vaguely towards the blooming lavender field beside them, buzzing with chaotic life. Like that, unpredictable, wild, thriving despite the lack of a schedule. He met her gaze again, a challenge flickering in the gray depths. "Which yield suffers more, Mrs. Dubois? The one choked by control, or the one starved of unexpected beauty?" The barb landed with pinpoint accuracy. He wasn't just talking about lavender, he was talking about her, about the wild flowers she'd thrown away, about the rigid fortress of her life, about the unexpected, terrifying beauty of the attraction she was trying so desperately to strangle. Heat flared in Amina's cheeks, a mix of fury and shame. He saw everything. "Beauty is irrelevant," she retorted, her voice tighter than she intended. "Efficiency is paramount. See to the timers." She turned sharply, but not before she saw it, the faintest ghost of that knowing curve on his lips. He'd scored a hit, The farm itself seemed to conspire against her discipline. The rich scent of turned earth as she walked near the freshly plowed south field brought an unwelcome flashback of his bare chest, damp and gleaming. The solid thunk of his axe splitting wood behind the cabin reverberated in her chest, echoing the frantic rhythm of her own heart. The quiet of the pre-dawn hours, once peaceful, now echoed with his watchful silence. Even the sturdy oak outside her office window remullered unyielding presence. Late one night, exhausted but unable to sleep, she sat at her desk, not working on spreadsheets but sketching. It was an old habit, a secret indulgence, quick, fluid lines capturing the essence of things, the curve of a horse's neck, the intricate pattern of a leaf, the play of moonlight on the fields. Her hand moved almost of its own volition, charcoal flying across the smooth paper. Not the fields, not the horses, not the horses. She drew the line of a shoulder, powerful and defined, the angle of a jaw shadowed and strong, the intense, watchful set of eyes beneath a furrowed brow. Storm gray, she imagined, though the charcoal rendered them dark. She drew the water droplet, tracing a path down a sculpted chest. Horrified, she froze. The charcoal snapped in her fingers. She stared at the half-finished sketch, a raw, intimate portrayal of Silas Thorne, born from memory and forbidden fascination. It was a confession on paper, proof of the wildfire raging inside her. With a gasp, she crumpled the paper violently, hurling it towards the cold fireplace. It missed, bouncing off the stone hearth. She buried her face in her hands, the scent of charcoal dust gritty in her nostrils, mingling with the phantom scent of sun-warmed skin and lavender. He consumes me. Without a word, without a touch, I am unraveling. The final blow to her resolve came unexpectedly. She was in the cool dimness of the pantry, searching for a specific vintage of balsamic vinegar, a small, futile attempt to regain control over something. Reaching for a high shelf, her elbow brushed against a delicate, hand-blown glass vase tucked away in a corner. It teetered, then fell. Amina lunged, but too late. It hit the stone floor with a crystalline shatter, shards exploding like frozen tears across the cool tiles. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet house. She stared down at the glittering wreckage. It wasn't valuable, just pretty. A piece her mother had found at a market years ago, its swirling blues and greens catching the light. A shadow filled the pantry doorway. Silas. He must have heard the crash. He surveyed the scene, Amina standing frozen amidst the shards, the fallen vinegar bottle unheeded at her feet. His gaze swept from the mess to her face, taking in the rare, undisguised dismay tightening her features, the slight tremor in her hands before she fisted them at her sides. He didn't speak immediately. He stepped carefully into the pantry, his boots crunching softly on the outer edges of the debris field. He crouched, not to clean, but to pick up one large curved shard, holding it up to the light filtering through the high window. It cast fractured blue and green patterns on the wall. Queen Anne's lace, he said quietly, his voice low in the confined space. He turned the shard, the light catching its edge. Tough, resilient, thrives on the edges. He looked up at her, his storm-gray eyes holding hers. Like this glass, beautiful, unexpected, meant to hold something alive. He paused, letting the weight of the comparison hang. Shame it broke, before it could be truly seen. He placed the shard carefully on a clear section of shelf. Then, without another word, he rose, turned, and left her standing alone amidst the glittering ruins of the vase. The echo of his words, beautiful, unexpected, meant to hold something alive, shattering what little remained of her resolve far more effectively than the fall. The fortress was breached. The wildfire raged unchecked. Control was a memory. The dangerous, beautiful, terrifying unknown that was Silas Thorne had seeped into her very bones. The battle was lost. Now there was only the terrifying, exhilarating freefall towards whatever came next.
Chapter 3. The pantry's cool dimness, still echoing with the crystalline shatter of glass, and the devastating weight of Silas's words, beautiful, unexpected, meant to hold something alive, became Amina's prison long after he'd left. The glittering shards on the stone floor mirrored the fractured state of her resolve. The fortress walls hadn't just been breached. They lay in ruins within her, buried under the avalanche of forbidden desire his naked vulnerability and cryptic observation had unleashed. Control was a phantom, efficiency, a hollow echo. She moved through the following days like a ghost haunting her own estate, the vibrant greens and golds of whispering pines rendered in muted grays by the tempest within. The meticulously ordered lines of her spreadsheets blurred into meaningless symbols. Every interaction with Silas, now unavoidable as the farm demanded shared oversight during peak season, was a fresh agony. He worked with the same quiet intensity, his storm-gray eyes holding hers with a new, unnerving directness. The watchfulness was still there, but layered over it was a simmering expectation, an acknowledgement of the crackling tension that now lay exposed between them, naked as he had been that evening in the cabin doorway. One sweltering afternoon, desperate for a semblance of normalcy, Amina retreated to the relative cool of the manor's cellar. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, cutting through a high barred window. She needed the original land deeds, a futile attempt to find leverage, some historical clause, anything to anchor her swirling thoughts in the solid ground of the Dubois legacy. Her fingers traced the spines of leather-bound ledgers and document boxes, thick with decades of dust. And there, tucked behind a crumbling volume on soil composition, she found it, not the deeds, but a newer, crisper folder, marked Ethelgard Holdings, Silent Partner Agreement, Annex B. Her father had never mentioned annexes. Cold dread, sharper than any desire, pricked her spine. She pulled it out, the dust making her cough. She sank onto an overturned crate, the cellar's damp chill seeping through her linen trousers as she flipped it open. The legalese swam before her eyes until she found the clause, buried deep. Right, Section 7.3, accelerated buyout option, upon the occurrence of a material financial instability event as defined in Schedule 2.1c. Ethelgard Holdings reserves the irrevocable right, exercisable at its sole discretion, to acquire 100% of the equity interest in Dubois Farms, LLC, for a sum equivalent to the outstanding secured debt obligations plus $1 material financial instability event. Her eyes scanned the definition. It was broad, encompassing, designed to trigger with the slightest tremor, like the projections glowing accusingly on her office screen. The date for potential exercise was imminent. Within days, the cold dread solidified into a block of ice in her chest, radiating outwards, freezing the blood in her veins. $1, her legacy, her family's blood and sweat for generations reduced to a symbolic dollar. And Silas knew. He was Ethelgard's man, their spy, their enforcer. He'd watched her struggle, watched her desperation, all the while knowing this axe hung over her head. The shared moments in the moonlit library, the jar of wildflowers, the searing touch in the storm, the devastating glimpse of his vulnerability, all lies, a calculated performance. The forbidden attraction, the wildfire she'd battled, was nothing but fuel for her own destruction. Betrayal, cold and vicious, ripped through her, momentarily eclipsing the consuming desire. Fury, white-hot and blinding, surged in its wake. She didn't think, she moved. The annex crumpled in her fist as she stormed out of the cellar, the cool darkness replaced by the oppressive heat of the late afternoon. She didn't head for the office, the place of cold numbers. She needed space, rawness, a battleground stripped of pretense. Her feet, clad in impractical leather flats, carried her towards the vast, shadowed interior of the main barn. Slanting rays of dusty sunlight pierced the high windows, illuminating swirling motes of hay and grain dust. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the sweet rot scent of dried grass, the tang of manure, and the warm animal musk of the horses stabled at the far end. It was a place of labor, of earth, of unvarnished reality. Silas was there, of course he was. He stood near the open double doors, silhouetted against the bright rectangle of sunlight, examining the worn leather of a harness spread over a sawhorse. His back was to her, broad shoulders tense beneath the thin cotton of his work shirt, damp with sweat at the nape of his neck. The quiet precision of his movements, once intriguing, now felt like an insult. Amina stopped a few paces inside the threshold, the crumpled annex trembling in her hand. The fury vibrated through her, a live wire. Thorne. Her voice cut through the thick silence, sharp as shattered glass. He stiffened, then slowly turned. His storm-gray eyes met hers, wary, instantly reading the tempest in her posture, the blaze in her onyx eyes. He said nothing, waiting. "Did you find it amusing?" The words erupted, low and venomous, shattering the barn's stillness. "Watching me, playing the stoic laborer while you held the deed to my extinction in your back pocket." She thrust the crumpled paper towards him like a weapon. "Accelerated buyout option. $1, Silas. Was that the price tag on my family's history? On my desperation?" She took a step closer, the sweet rot smell of hay suddenly cloying. All this time, the silence, the observations. Her voice cracked on the word, betraying the hurt beneath the rage. Was it part of the assessment? See how long the Dubois heiress could struggle before you swooped in for the final carve-up. Did you enjoy the show? My unraveling? The last word was a raw whisper, laden with the shame of her own vulnerability. Silas didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on hers. Intense, turbulent. He didn't reach for the paper. The controlled stillness was gone, replaced by a visible tension thrumming through him, a storm held barely in check. "Amina," he began, his voice rougher than usual. "Don't," she spat, taking another step, closing the distance.
She was close enough now to see the flecks of darker gray in his irises, the faint pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat. The scent of him, sun, sweat, leather, and something uniquely masculine, filled her senses, warring with the fury. "Don't you dare use my name. Not after this. You infiltrated. You lied. You played me." Her hand, still clutching the annex, trembled violently. Was the cabin part of the act? The technology?
The memory of him shirtless, water-slicked, flooded her mind, intensifying the betrayal. Did you get a good enough look for the assessment report? His jaw clenched, a muscle ticked in his cheek. The controlled facade was fracturing, revealing raw edges beneath. "It wasn't like that," he ground out, his voice low, strained. "Then what was it like, Mr. Thorne?" She hissed, the title a lash. "Entertainment, a magnate's bored diversion, slumming it with the desperate heiress before you took everything." Tears, hot and humiliating, pricked her eyes, blurring his face. She blinked them back furiously. "Tell me, was the kiss clause hidden in Annex C? Observe target's breaking point. Document emotional vulnerability for optimal leverage acquisition." The barb struck deep. His eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something akin to pain, a profound turmoil that mirrored the desolation she'd glimpsed in herself during weak moments. He took a sudden step towards her, closing the final distance. The air between them crackled, thick with rage, betrayal, and the undeniable terrifying pull that defied all reason. "Leverage," he echoed, his voice a raw scrape. "Is that what you think this is?" His gaze raked her face, taking in the tear she couldn't quite suppress trembling on her lashes, the proud tilt of her chin despite the devastation. "You see plots and assessments. You see a predator circling." He lifted a hand, not to strike, but slowly, deliberately towards her face. Amina recoiled instinctively, but there was nowhere to go. The rough wood of a stall door pressed against her back. His calloused thumb, rough from labor yet infinitely gentle, brushed the traitorous tear from her cheek. The touch was electric, devastating. It wasn't a claim of ownership, but an acknowledgement of shared pain, a connection forged in the wreckage of lies. The heat of his skin against hers sent shockwaves through her system, short-circuiting the fury, leaving only raw, exposed nerve. Her breath hitched, a ragged sound in the sudden, charged silence of the barn. The scent of hay, leather, and him enveloped her. His storm-gray eyes held hers, stripped bare now, reflecting not calculation, but a maelstrom of conflict, desire, and a desolation that mirrored her own. The dam holding back years of control, denial, and forbidden longing didn't just break, it exploded. With a sound that was half sob, half defiance, Amina surged forward, not away, towards, her hands fisted in the damp fabric of his shirt, pulling him down. Her lips crashed against his. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't tentative, it was a collision of worlds, a detonation of pent-up need and shared isolation. Hunger met hunger, desperation met desperation. The kiss was fierce, deep, a claiming and a surrender rolled into one. She tasted salt, tears, sweat, and the faint, earthy tang of the barn, and beneath it, the uniquely Silas essence that had haunted her senses for weeks. His response was instantaneous, volcanic. A low groan vibrated against her lips, deep in his chest. One large hand tangled fiercely in the intricate braids at her nape, angling her head for deeper access. The other arm banded around her waist, pulling her hard against the solid wall of his body, crushing the crumpled annex between them. Irrelevant now. The kiss deepened, turned consuming. His lips moved over hers with a raw, possessive intensity that stole her breath and her reason. The roughness of his stubble scraped her sensitive skin, a delicious friction. The iron strength of his arms, the hard planes of his chest pressed against her. The sheer overwhelming maleness of him overwhelmed her senses. The world narrowed to the heat of his mouth, the demanding sweep of his tongue, the frantic beat of his heart against hers, the intoxicating scent of sun, sweat, and desire that was purely him. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads pressed together, still locked in the fierce embrace. Amina's lungs burned, her legs trembled. The rough wood of the stall dug into her back, anchoring her in the whirlwind. His breath was hot and ragged against her lips. His storm-gray eyes, dark with passion and something deeper, searched her face, inches away. "Amina," he rasped, her name a prayer and a confession on his lips, rough with disuse and raw emotion. His hand, still tangled in her hair, gentled slightly, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin behind her ear. The touch sent fresh shivers down her spine. She stared up at him, dazed, her own defenses obliterated. The fury was still there, a smoldering ember, but drowned beneath the flood of sensation, the shocking rightness of his body against hers, the devastating honesty in his kiss. "Who are you?"
she whispered, the words barely audible, breathless. He closed his eyes for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing his features. When he opened them, the gaze he leveled at her was stripped bare, vulnerable. "Silas Thorne," he said, his voice low and rough, vibrating against her skin where his lips had brushed her temple moments before. "Founder of Arthurgard Holdings." He paused, the weight of the admission hanging heavy in the hay-scented air. The disguise, it wasn't just for the farm. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I needed to see it, without the distortion of the boardroom, the land, the operation." His gaze intensified, boring into hers. I heard the stories," he continued, his voice a gravelly caress. "The Ice Queen of Whispering Pines, beautiful, ruthless, holding a dying empire together with sheer will." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a touch that now felt like branding. "I came to see the land. I stayed for the woman who ruled it." He shook his head slightly, a rueful shadow crossing his face. The farmhand was the mask, the magnate. He was always watching, waiting, trying to understand the fire beneath the ice. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her lips. The buyout clause, it was standard, protection, for Aethelgard. But Amina, his voice dropped to a raw whisper, "I never intended to use it, not against you. I bought the debt to protect Whispering Pines, to give you time, to—"
He hesitated, the vulnerability stark. "To be near you, to understand the woman who made this land breathe, even when it was gasping." He searched her eyes, the storm in his own laid bare, desire, guilt, a desperate hope. The assessment became irrelevant. "The moment I saw you across that field, the moment you threw out those damn flowers." A ghost of that dry, knowing curve touched his lips, but it was softer now. "You were the unexpected variable, the wildfire I couldn't control, the one thing Aethelgard couldn't assess, couldn't quantify, couldn't resist." The revelation landed like successive blows, each one reshaping her reality. The spy was real, but his mission had been hijacked by her. His lies were vast, yet his desire, the raw intensity she'd just experienced, felt terrifyingly genuine. The buyout clause, a sword of Damocles, was held by a man who claimed he never meant to drop it, who claimed he stayed for her. The crumpled annex, forgotten, fell from her nerveless fingers onto the hay-strewn floor. Amina stared at him, her mind reeling, her body still thrumming from the kiss, the press of his body. The fury was still present, a cold knot of betrayal, but tangled inextricably with the devastating heat of his confession, the shocking vulnerability in his eyes, and the lingering addictive taste of him on her lips. The farmhand was gone, the magnate stood revealed, and the forbidden desire she'd fought so fiercely wasn't dead. It was a raging inferno, fed by the oxygen of truth and lies. She didn't pull away. She stayed pressed against the rough wood, trapped between the solid heat of him and the splintered remains of her world. "Aethelgard Holdings," she repeated, the name feeling alien on her tongue. "You own everything." "Not everything," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes, intense, possessive. "Not you. Never you, Amina. Though God knows," he added, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through her. "I want to." The words hung in the golden gloom, a new kind of tension thrumming between them, no longer forbidden, but charged with the terrifying possibilities of a bond forged in deception and detonated by desire. The kiss had shattered the ice, the revelation had shattered the world. Now, amidst the sweet rot scent of hay and the echo of their ragged breaths, they stood on the precipice of something vast, unknown, and utterly consuming. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the breathless pause before the avalanche truly begins. Amina lifted a trembling hand, not to push him away, but to trace the line of his jaw, rough with stubble, her touch a question, an exploration of the man who had rewritten her reality with a kiss and a confession. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly, a shudder running through him. The battle was over, the transformation had begun, and the world for both of them would never be the same. Chapter 4. The scent of hay and male sweat still clung to Amina's skin, a potent reminder of the barn's chaos, even as dawn painted the unfamiliar cabin walls in stripes of pale gold. She lay cocooned in the unfamiliar softness of Silas's sheets, surprisingly luxurious linen, a silent testament to the life he'd hidden, his body a solid wall of heat against her back, one heavy arm draped possessively over her waist. The silence here was different, no longer a charged void, but a deep, resonant hum, filled with the memory of shattered resolve and the terrifying, exhilarating reality of shared skin. Last night, after the revelation and the kiss that had rewritten the rules of gravity, words had failed, Silas had simply gathered her trembling form, the crumpled annex forgotten on the barn floor, and carried her not to the manor, but to his cabin. The sleek technology on the desk glowed softly, an alien sentinel in the rustic space. He'd placed her gently on the bed, his storm-gray eyes holding a question she couldn't yet articulate. She hadn't resisted. Exhaustion, shock, and the undeniable magnetic pull had drawn her into the sheets. Sleep had claimed her almost instantly, a heavy, dreamless oblivion in the fortress of his arms. Now, waking, the enormity pressed down, Arthurgard Holdings. The name echoed in the quiet. The man breathing steadily behind her commanded empires, yet his calloused hand resting lightly on her hip belonged to the man who'd calmed Apollo in the storm, who'd mended fences with quiet precision. The deception was a canyon between them, yet the heat of his body, the protective curve of his arm, felt like the only solid ground. She shifted slightly. His arm tightened infinitesimally, a silent claim. Dubois. His voice was a sleep-roughened rumble against the nape of her neck, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. Or do you prefer Thorne now? The dry question, laced with a hint of his characteristic observation, startled a breathless laugh from her. It felt alien, that sound, in the aftermath of betrayal and seismic desire. She turned within the circle of his arm, facing him. Morning light gilded the sharp planes of his face, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the storm-gray eyes now clear and watchful, holding a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Dubois, she said, her own voice husky. Whispering Pines is Dubois soil, though I suppose, she added, tracing the surprisingly smooth line of his collarbone with a fingertip, a deliberate exploration of the man who was both farmhand and magnate. Technically it's Edelgard Holdings soil now. Or was that clause purely decorative? He captured her wandering hand, bringing it to his lips. The kiss he pressed against her knuckles was slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. The claws, he murmured against her skin, his breath warm, is ash, burned the moment you kissed me back in the barn. He turned her hand over, his thumb tracing the lines of her palm, a touch both intimate and possessive. The land is yours, it always was. Arthurgard was merely holding it in trust for the rightful queen. He raised an eyebrow, a ghost of that knowing curve on his lips. Unless the queen prefers abdication, I hear running a global conglomerate is slightly more demanding than overseeing peach harvests. The banter, unexpected and laced with a new dangerous intimacy, disarmed her. Abdication implies I ever held the throne uncontested, she countered, her own lips twitching despite the lingering knot of hurt. Turns out the quiet farmhand was a usurper in flannel all along. She pulled her hand free, but only to trace the faint scar near his shoulder she'd glimpsed that fateful evening. How many other kingdoms have you infiltrated, Mr. Thorne? Any other unsuspecting heiresses needing rescue via forced marriage? He caught her hand again, his grip firm but gentle, pulling her closer until their bodies aligned, heat radiating between them. Only one kingdom interests me, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl that vibrated through her. Only one queen. His gaze dropped to her lips. And the marriage, he added, leaning in until his breath mingled with hers, was the least forced part of this arrangement. Though the consummation, his lips brushed hers, feather light, a promise and a question, could use some revisiting. For due diligence, of course. Arthurgard requires thorough assessments. The kiss that followed was nothing like the desperate collision in the barn. It was slow, deep, exploratory, a rediscovery. His lips were warm, demanding yet patient, coaxing a response that flowed from her like honey, warm and sweet. The taste of him, sleep and mint, and something indefinably Silas, was intoxicating. Her hands slid up the hard planes of his back, feeling the powerful muscles shift beneath his skin, anchoring herself in the reality of him. The sleek tech on the desk, the Northern Lights photograph, the global empire, they faded into insignificance against the overwhelming sensory reality of his mouth on hers, his hands tangling in her hair, the solid heat of his body pressing her into the mattress. It was a language beyond words, speaking of possession, surrender, and a connection that felt terrifyingly ancient and utterly new. The world outside the cabin door hadn't changed. Whispering Pines still needed its queen, but the queen returned changed. Amina moved through her day with a different energy. The glacial control was still present, but beneath it ran a current of warmth, a vulnerability that manifested not as weakness, but as a different kind of strength. She issued directives, but now sometimes with a glance towards Silas, a silent question passing between them. He was no longer the invisible laborer. He worked alongside the crews, his true identity known only to Amina, his authority now inherent, unquestioned by the men who sensed the shift.
Communication remained sparse in words, but voluminous in touch and shared silence. In the cool dimness of the newly organized feed room, their hands brushed, reaching for the same sack of grain. A jolt, a shared glance, a lingering touch before one stepped back. He'd place a mug of strong black coffee beside her ledger in the morning, his finger briefly tracing the curve of her shoulder before he left. She'd find a single perfect peach, the first of the season, on her desk, still warm from the sun, a silent offering. One afternoon, overseeing the installation of new efficient irrigation lines Silas had expedited, Amina stood surveying the geometric patterns of pipes snaking across the field. Silas approached, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He stopped beside her, close enough for his shoulder to brush hers, the contact sending a familiar frisson through her. Precision irrigation, he remarked, his gaze following the lines. Calculated drops, maximizes yield, minimizes waste. He turned his head slightly, his storm-gray eyes catching the sunlight. Efficient, his lips quirked. Predictable. Amina kept her gaze forward, but a smile played at the corner of her mouth. Unlike some variables I could mention, she counted smoothly. Variables that arrive disguised as farmhands and turn entire worlds upside down with a single kiss. He chuckled, a low, rich sound that vibrated pleasantly in the warm air. Ah, but unpredictable variables, he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping conspiratorially, can lead to... His hand brushed hers, hidden from the crew by the angle of their bodies. Wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Dubois, or are you still solely invested in predictable returns? She finally turned to face him fully, meeting his challenging gaze, the sunlit flecks of gold in his gray eyes. I'm learning, she said, her voice low and steady, to appreciate the strategic value of controlled chaos, especially when it comes with such compelling assets. Her gaze deliberately swept over him, from his grease-streaked forearms to the open collar of his shirt, lingering for a fraction of a second. The flush that crept up his neck was deeply satisfying. Assets, Mrs. Dubois, he echoed, a dangerous glint in his eye. He took a half-step closer, eliminating the space between them. The scent of sun, earth, and engine grease was suddenly overwhelming. Are we discussing irrigation, or are you conducting a personal inventory? Due diligence, Mr. Thorne, she replied, holding her ground, her own gaze unwavering. Ethelgard isn't the only entity requiring thorough assessments. One must ensure the infrastructure is sound before committing further investment. She let her fingertips graze the hard muscle of his forearm, a deliberate, provocative touch. Wouldn't want any hidden flaws. His hand shot out, capturing her wrist gently but firmly. The crew was momentarily forgotten. Flaws, Amina. His voice was a low thrum, charged with intent. I assure you the infrastructure is exceptionally sound. Over-engineered, one might say. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin of her inner wrist. Perhaps you require a more hands-on inspection. The bond proved inconclusive. Heat flooded her cheeks, but she refused to back down. Perhaps the office would be a more appropriate venue for such a detailed audit, she countered, her pulse hammering under his touch. Less chance of unforeseen variables, like farmhands with poor timing. He laughed again, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He released her wrist, but his gaze held hers, promising retribution. The office it is, Mrs. Dubois, he conceded, the formality laced with intimate knowledge. After the East Field is prepped, wouldn't want the Dubois queen neglecting her kingdom for a mere asset assessment. Then turned and strode back towards the irrigation crew, leaving Amina standing in the sun-drenched field, her skin tingling where he'd touched her, a reluctant smile spreading across her face. The banter was a new dance, a playful negotiation of power and desire, a way to navigate the minefield of their past while building something new. The transformation wasn't just personal, it seeped into the very bones of Whispering Pines. The manor, once a slightly faded monument to a struggling legacy, began to breathe again. Silas, with Ethelgard's resources flowing seamlessly but invisibly, didn't impose, he facilitated. He consulted Amina on every change, their late-night discussions in the newly renovated study overlooking the moonlit fields becoming a ritual. The room, once her father's formal office, now held 2 sleek workstations, comfortable armchairs by a fireplace, and the stunning Northern Lights photograph hanging proudly, a symbol of the wild beauty they were integrating. One such night, rain lashed against the new energy-efficient windows. Amina sat curled in an armchair, reviewing plans for a state-of-the-art sustainable packing facility. Silas stood by the window, a silhouette against the storm, sipping whiskey. You know, he said, not turning, his voice thoughtful. Ethelgard could absorb the entire Dubois operation into its existing logistics. Centralize, streamline. He took a sip. Maximize efficiency. Amina looked up from the blueprints. She recognized the test. Efficiency, she echoed, setting down her tablet. Like your precision irrigation. She rose, walking towards him. The firelight cast dancing shadows on her face. Predictable, controlled. He turned, leaning against the window frame, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Exactly. She stopped before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, to smell the peat smoke of the whiskey on his breath. "But Whispering Pines," she said softly, reaching out to straighten the collar of his dark sweater, her fingers lingering on the strong column of his neck, "has always thrived on a little wildness, its own rhythm, its own identity." She met his gaze. Wouldn't subsuming it into the Ethelgard machine risk homogenizing the yield, losing the unique flavor of the Dubois peach? A slow smile spread across his face, genuine appreciation warming his eyes. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Point taken, Queen Dubois," he murmured against her skin. "Ethelgard provides the roots, the nourishment, but Whispering Pines." He looked past her, out at the storm-lashed fields visible beyond the glass. "Whispering Pines provides the soul, the unexpected beauty." He brought her hand to his lips again, his gaze returning to hers, intense, like its queen. The partnership solidified. Amina brought her fierce intelligence, her deep understanding of the land and its history, to Ethelgard's vast agricultural portfolio. Silas brought resources, global reach, and a ruthless efficiency, tempered by her influence. They became a whispered about force, the reclusive magnate and his brilliant, beautiful consort, revitalizing an empire from the ground up. The farmhand's cabin was demolished, replaced by a graceful, modern guest house. The main manor, however, remained firmly Amina's domain, now infused with shared warmth. Months bled into a year. The frantic pace of rescue and rebuilding settled into a powerful, sustainable rhythm. The passion between them remained volcanic, a private language spoken in the dark, in shared glances across a crowded meeting, in the brush of hands during a walk through the lavender fields, now blooming more vibrantly than ever. It was a source of strength, a constant renewal. One crisp autumn evening, they stood together on the wide porch of the revitalized manor. The setting sun painted the sky in fiery hues of orange, purple, and gold, reflecting off the healthy, ripening fields below. The air was cool, scented with wood smoke from the first fire of the season indoors, and the fading perfume of honeysuckle clinging to the trellis. Crickets sang their evening chorus. Amina leaned back against the sturdy porch railing, sipping hot cider, watching the colors deepen. She wore a soft, wine-colored sweater, her posture relaxed, powerful in a way that radiated contentment rather than rigid control. Silas stepped behind her, his presence a familiar warmth. He didn't speak. He simply slid his arms around her waist, pulling her back against the solid wall of his chest. She sighed, leaning into him, her head resting against his shoulder. His chin settled gently on the crown of her head. His large, calloused hands rested possessively, tenderly, over her abdomen. The subtle curve was new, a secret life burgeoning beneath the soft wool. Their silent communion held the weight of the journey, the icy beginning, the shattering revelations, the forging of trust, the integration of their worlds. The fury and betrayal had been tempered by time and truth, woven into the fabric of a bond stronger for having been tested. "Quiet empire," he murmured, his voice a soft rumble in the peaceful twilight. Amina covered one of his hands with hers, lacing their fingers together over the promise of their future. Below them, Whispering Pines stretched out, vibrant and thriving, a testament not just to survival, but to a flourishing born of unexpected union. The Dubois legacy was secure, now intertwined with the Thorne strength, creating something entirely new. She asked softly, a smile in her voice, tilting her head back slightly to look up at him. He met her gaze, his storm-gray eyes soft, reflecting the dying fire of the sunset and the quiet depth of his love. He lowered his head, his lips brushing hers in a kiss as gentle and profound as the peace settling over the land. "The land speaks for itself, Mrs. Dubois," he whispered against her lips. And so, his hand splayed protectively over her abdomen, "does the future."
They stood entwined, watching the last embers of the sun sink below the horizon. The silence between them was no longer a wall, nor a charged void. It was a deep, resonant harmony, the quiet hum of a shared life, a shared legacy, an empire built not on conquest, but on the fertile ground of desire met, vulnerability shared, and a love that had irrevocably transformed the soil, the sky, and the hearts of those who ruled it. The crickets sang, the scent of honeysuckle and wood smoke lingered. His hand remained warm and sure over hers, over their future. The quiet empire thrived,